You guys, the chokehold that Minute Rice had on my mom in the 80s and 90s was like insane.
When I serve chicken, I serve Minute Rice. It's a fast and simple way to fancy up an everyday meal.
I actually never remember her buying regular rice and cooking it on the stovetop. It was always Minute Rice. But as I got older, I never really purchased Minute Rice. I now have a rice cooker, which you guys know I talk about all the time, which makes cooking regular rice super easy. But I recently got my hands on this vintage cookbook from 1976. It's called The Art of Budget Cooking, and it's actually a Minute Rice cookbook in which all of the recipes include Minute Rice. So I thought today we'd bust out a box of Minute Rice and make 3 recipes from this cookbook, and we're gonna see if Minute Rice and these budget meals have stood the test of time. So I'm starting out with this stuffed pepper recipe because I've been craving it for a while, and this comes out to only $2.11 per serving. I will be sharing costs for each of these recipes as a whole and per serving, so we can judge if these budget recipes still are effective today. So I've got 2 green peppers and some Minute Rice. I have a half a pound of ground beef because I am cutting this particular recipe down. I also cracked an egg in there. I'm gonna go ahead and add my dry rice to the beef along with some milk. Minute Rice is basically par-cooked rice. So all you have to do is soak it in boiled water, turn off the stove for 5 minutes, and it cooks perfectly. So in these dishes, basically what you're gonna see is the rice is going to cook in the dish in the oven. So this recipe calls for some tomato sauce. I actually had some marinara sauce that I canned last summer in the pantry. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that, but if you don't have any of that, just use regular tomato sauce. I'm gonna stir the ground beef mixture up so that everything is well combined. And at this point, we're gonna drop our halved and seeded bell peppers into some boiling water for just a few minutes to soften them. I don't think you necessarily have to do this, but the recipe directed to, and I actually prefer my stuffed peppers a little bit softer. I don't really want them crispy. So after that's done, I'm just going to remove them to a plate and let them cool a little bit so I can stuff them with the ground beef mixture. If you're cooking the whole recipe, you're probably going to need a larger pan, but since I only had 2 peppers, I got this 11x7 dish out, greased it on the bottom so the peppers wouldn't stick, and then I just evenly divided that beef and rice mixture into the peppers. I'm going to spoon some of that tomato sauce over the top, dot it with some butter, and go ahead and pop it into the oven for the directed amount of time. I did top this with some cheese towards the end. I used shredded Parmesan because that's what I had readily available in the refrigerator. You don't have to do this step, but I really like cheese on the top of them and would recommend doing that. If you haven't made stuffed peppers in a while, definitely recommend it. I feel like it's one of those retro dishes that can sometimes be forgotten, but it's really, really good. Now, what you should serve with these stuffed peppers is a nice warm slice of bread. And today's video sponsor is Wild Grain. I've been working with them for a long time here on my channel, and I love Wild Grain. I was actually getting their bread long before they ever asked to sponsor my videos here on YouTube. And I love it because I am not a great bread baker. I just don't, for some reason, have that skill. And so I always keep an assortment of Wild Grain breads and pastries and pasta and everything else in my freezer because it makes such a great addition to weeknight meals. All you have to do is preheat your oven, pull the bread out of the freezer, you bake it directly on the oven rack, and you have hot, fresh bread that your whole family is gonna love. One of the items I got recently, which I highly recommend, are these ham and cheese foldovers. So basically it's kind of like their croissant dough, but it's got ham and cheese inside. All you do is pop them in the oven and they bake up perfectly crispy and crunchy. They are so delicious, and we had them for breakfast. So Wild Grain is actually the first Bake from Frozen subscription box for sourdough breads, artisanal pastries, and fresh pastas. The reason why I love it is because you can get the benefits of sourdough without the hard work. It's so convenient. Every item bakes in 25 minutes or less, and you can also support the best small bakeries in the country. Wild Grain is fully customizable, and they're constantly adding new seasonal and limited time special items so you can build your own box. So just go to wildgrain.com/ Jen Chapin so you can get $30 off your first box. Plus, you're going to get free croissants for life. So check out that link in the description box below. You're going to get $30 off your first wild grain box, which is an awesome deal. And if you're on your phone, you can tap the screen right here. Next up is Carefree chicken casserole, because we all need a little more carefree recipes in our life. Am I right? This only comes to $5.38 for the whole recipe, which means it's only $1.35 per serving. So I think that is a total win. I've got some rice, cream of chicken soup, cheese, chicken, and some mixed veggies. So I'm going to go ahead and start by putting my condensed soup into a pot with some water, and I'm going to whisk that up and heat it up until it is simmering, and then I'll add my minute rice. Now, the original recipe called for cream of mushroom soup, but I'm not a huge fan of that. So whenever a recipe calls for it, I pretty much always substitute cream of chicken unless it's green bean casserole. After the rice is mixed in there, you just want to add your chicken and your veggies. I'm using some frozen peas and corn that I par cooked in the microwave, but you could also use canned peas or basically any veggies that you want. I'm going to go ahead and add some shredded cheese. I was actually really excited to try this recipe because it's similar to a cheesy chicken and rice casserole that I make from America's Test Kitchen. So I wanted to kind of see how it stood up to that. After everything is mixed together, you want to go ahead and put it into a greased dish, smooth out the top, and then I added some additional shredded cheddar cheese over the top. I did use a little bit more cheese than the original recipe called for, because the original recipe only called for half a cup, which I didn't think was very much for the amount that this makes. I covered it with foil, popped it into the oven, and baked it covered. I did pull the foil off for the last like 5 to 10 minutes just to brown it a bit on the top, garnishing it with some green onion for a little bit of extra flavor. And then I let this cool and then dished it out into bowls. I have to say, this is probably the most family-friendly recipe in this whole video, and probably the one that I would be most likely to make again. So definitely give it a try. It's not as creamy as the original recipe that I normally make, but it's definitely good. The flavors are obviously very mild and kid-friendly, so definitely try this if you are looking for a super quick dinner. Next up is this recipe for mock rice quiche. This definitely piqued my interest, and it only comes out to $1.24 per serving. So I chopped up some bell pepper and onions, and the recipe did not say to do this, but I don't really like crunchy veggies in my quiche, and I wanted to make sure that I kind of par cooked them before I added them. So I just sauteed them in a little bit of oil and then let them cool. I'm going to mix my eggs with some milk and go ahead and whisk those together. So I think the name for this recipe should be like mock quiche with rice. I think it doesn't really say in the book, but I think the point of this is to use less eggs and more rice, so you can kind of make something that tastes like a quiche but is maybe a little bit more budget friendly, since rice is typically cheaper than eggs. I don't know. I think that's the point of it. But basically, I stirred everything together along with the rice, peppers, onions, added some Parmesan cheese in there, breadcrumbs, melted butter, some salt, and just made sure everything was well combined before I added it to my baking dish. I did go ahead and grease my dish. This is an 8x8 square baking dish. Baked it per the recipe instructions. I will say that whatever I baked it for according to the instructions was not long enough, so I did have to put it back in the oven for about 15 minutes because it was still runny in the middle. But this is what it looks like when I sliced a piece out of it. Honestly, this was not bad. Like, I would make it again, but I would definitely have to make some modifications to the flavors because I just thought it was very plain. But it's definitely a very budget-friendly and innovative recipe. Here's what the photo looked like in the cookbook. It kind of looks like they added the breadcrumbs to the top, but in the recipe it didn't say to do that, so who knows. Anyway, I really think these budget recipes have stood the test of time and would recommend them all with some reservations. So thank you so much for watching this video today. If you want me to do more vintage budget videos, let me know in the comments below.